stood in front of a large brick building. I just stepped out of a taxi, handed the driver his fare, and he drove off without a word, like he didn't even want to be there. This wasn't a bad neighborhood. Hell, I was on West 22nd Street in Chelsea, looking up at the windows of the apartments as I felt my heart race. A condo. It just had to be a condo. That was all this building was made up of, and they weren't cheap either. Granted, most of what I saw in this area were gorgeous pieces of architecture, but I loved my apartment quite a bit to want to get rid of it for a smaller place that cost me more money. And trust me, my penthouse suite cost me plenty enough already. Not like I was here to scope out a new living situation anyway. This is where the artist lived. And I could honestly say that based on the one painting I saw, I could see how they could afford it. The artist was a young woman named Sarah. She originally moved from Columbus, Ohio to New York in hopes of becoming a known artist, and from what I could tell, she accomplished just that. Even without the striking similarities, I would have grabbed her pieces up for a showing at the gallery. When I asked Lauren to call her a week ago to set up this appointment, she, Sarah, that is, was ecstatic. So ecstatic that when I was finally able to draw myself away from the example painting brought in, I could hear her from within 10 feet of Lauren on the phone. After standing there for what felt like an eternity, trying to get my heart to stop its frantic beating, I made my way inside to the elevator. After hitting the button that would take me to the floor where her condo was located, I felt myself calming slightly. From an artist's perspective, this building was a very inspiring space, but not somewhere I wanted to live. Thank goodness there were no men with wandering eyes in this one. I was truly alone. Alone, except for you, baby, I whispered to what lived inside of me. Because of Hyde, I was never truly alone. Even when I felt like I was, she would make sure of it. She laughed inside me, and it vibrated inside of my body as it buzzed inside of my mind. I shook my head slightly to make her stop, and it seemed to work for a few seconds, until she was back, chortling even louder. I chose to do what I could to ignore it. But what made it even harder was the grin on the face of my reflection. She was never this prominent until I tried to hold her at bay. I guess this was her way of showing me that no matter what, she was in control and she wouldn't be going anywhere. But how would she? She was fused to me, my soul. So there wasn't a way to detach her, and this I knew. Somehow. I turned out of the elevator, leaving Hyde's smiling image behind, but could still hear her laughter like what I was doing was silly. It didn't even matter. It did to me. So she just had to come along for the ride. In that, she didn't have a choice. Without even realizing it, I ended up in front of Sarah's condo door, with my hand raised to knock, the large 5D glaring at me as I blinked the few seconds of missing time away. I shook it off and wrapped my fingers on the solid wood door, making it a nice echoing sound down the foyer as it bounced against the exposed brick of the hallway. The door opened, and a young woman, who I assumed was Sarah, stood there in a white tank and black yoga pants. Her shoulder-length, bright pink hair looked slightly unkempt, but more like she'd been running her hand through it instead of just rolling out of bed. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes scanning me with interest as she took my appearance in. I saw something in her eyes as she stared, meeting my eyes as she did. Her eyes widened a little bit, and I knew what I had just seen. Recognition. I dropped my hand and grabbed a business card out of my purse, handing it to her with a well-practiced flourish that had taken me a year to get down. "I'm Blythe McAllister from Agora Gallery," she said as she rose, voice rose in pitch, and her eyebrows rose. It was almost as like she had forgotten, and I tried not to let a little giggle slip out. I had to keep the professional facade intact for now. "Yes." I put my hand out for a handshake. "I'm here to take a look at more of your work." Instead of taking my hand, she wrapped her arms around me and gave me a fierce hug. I had to say I was surprised, and it took me a moment to adjust to the fact that every time I saw her, I'd be getting a hug instead of a handshake. I could never get used to the feeling of my personal space being somewhat violated. But this was part of working with artists. You never knew what you'd get. At least this At least she didn't get any brightly coloured paint on my clothes, like Bun had the year before. Sunburst yellow with streaks of green. Even with the dry cleaning, it was safe to say that the dress had to be thrown in the trash. Doing a quick once over, I noticed she didn't have any paints, charcoal, or any other kind of artistic medium on her that could ruin my clothes. I let out a very quiet sigh of relief as she ushered me into her condo. I barely took 2 steps past the threshold before I was greeted by a black cat, weaving its way between my feet. Good thing I wasn't allergic. It stopped, sat back on its haunches, and stared at me, meowing like it was trying to speak to me. For all I knew, it was. You never knew with animals, and normally they hated me, which is why I didn't have one of my own. You can only stand getting growled at by a cat or a dog so many times. My parents wanted me to take horseback riding lessons when I was a child, but I got bucked off as soon as I hopped into the saddle. That was how my parents learned that I'd been gifted by the curse, by their genetics. I never knew which parent was the one that passed it down to me. But it didn't really matter anymore, did it? They were dead. I was still here and without so many of the answers I needed. I got to learn it all on my own, with Hyde's little bit of help along the way. Now, maybe Sarah could help me too. My fingers were crossed. I stared into the cat's bright green eyes as she meowed at me again and pawed at my leg. "Oh, Shadow!" Sarah exclaimed as she picked the cat up and cuddled her chest, nuzzling into Shadow's pitch black fur. "I'm sorry about that. She normally doesn't like new people." She pushed her pink bangs out of her eyes. That's when I noticed how her hair again. My first impression was slightly off, as it seemed the natural colour was a deep chestnut brown at the roots, the rest perfectly dyed like it had been done on purpose. Her brown eyes met mine, and the strike of recognition hit them again. She was obviously trying her best not to stare at me, which was making this meeting even more awkward. I thought of telling her where she knew me from, but I had a feeling that she already knew and wasn't going to say anything at risk of sounding like she needed some time in the loony bin. "It's alright, I like cats. They just normally don't like me." I spoke the words with a smile and kept my eyes on the green-eyed beauty in her arms. A flash of my own green eyes My reflection moved through my mind with lightning quickness, but I ignored it. I'll take it I'll take you to see what I have. She began to move out of the foyer and into her expensive living room. The decoration of a condo was minimalistic at best. A couch, coffee table, a lamp, a flat screen television were all that broke the sanitary white of the room apart. I closed the door and followed her as she passed a beautiful kitchen filled with black stainless steel appliances and down a half hallway, passing her bedroom and heading down the second room that she said she was using as her studio. She mentioned casually that she never had guests who stayed the night, so she didn't care about having a guest room. All I did was nod as she led me further into the condo. She moved with a grace I had only seen in dancers. From what I knew about her, she never had been. Maybe she was just born with it. Some people were. Sarah put Shadow down right outside the open door to a studio and held her arm out in a welcoming gesture, letting me know that I could enter without even saying a word. I wasn't going to lie. I felt right at home here, and probably would have walked in without her treating me like a long lost friend. The cat was like my shadow as I passed Sarah and stalked into the studio, examining every painting I came across. From what I could tell about them, they were a series of uh, paintings at the gallery that was possibly the first one. Wow. I breathed as I looked at each and every one, not passing any of them without giving them a close once over. Each one looked exactly like me, with one brown eye and one green, covered in blood in various stages of undress, ecstasy, or feasting, even murder. Then I saw one that made me stop short. I was in a purple dress, strap torn, one falling off my shoulder, with hair in disarray, and blood dripping down from my parted lips and chin. It was so realistic, but had a surreal quality to it that made it even more thrilling to look at. I turned to see Sarah, and she looked slightly uncomfortable, her eyes moving from each painting and back to me like she was trying to make sure of the resemblance between me and the images she had painted. I straightened and watched her. Shadow weaved around my ankles again, purring and trilling her acceptance of me into their home. Is this a series of paintings? Do they tell a story? I asked, looking over my shoulder and back at the painting that I now knew for a fact depicted what had transpired last night. I felt a tingle in the exact spots on my lips and chin where his blood had touched me. Hyde was trying to remind me of what I was. I resisted the urge to wipe my chin. Nothing was there, and I knew it, but my mind kept telling me that there was. They do. They go in a specific order. The one I sent to the gallery goes right here. She pointed to an empty easel next to the one depicting last night's events. I nearly choked on the air that I breathed and couldn't hold her gaze as she glanced at me. So soon I'd be naked, feasting on an unsuspecting man's heart. Of course, I'd no idea how far into the future all of these events were supposed to happen. You could never tell with visions of the future, which now I was 100% sure that was what was going on. Anything in particular that inspired them? I turned to the painting and was examining it again, trying really hard not to look back at Zira. She seemed to be getting a little antsy with me being there. I also had to admit that the resemblance was uncanny in each and every painting. I wasn't sure what to think. I didn't believe in stuff like this, right? I didn't believe in fortune tellers and magic crystal balls. Now, I may have to change my tune. The detail in the specific painting I examined was explicit. The blood splatter was like she had literally killed someone in front of the canvas. My dreams, each dream I have, whether small or large, ends up on a canvas. I can't help it. I'm in front of a canvas almost every morning before the sun comes up. She came to stand next to me with her arms crossed over her chest and her feet parted like she was ready to pounce. I stood up straight and planted my feet just in case. I knew that someone who was about to attack looked like, and I would be prepared for it. Once I was fully erect, a fist collided with my midsection, sending me into a coughing fit that was followed by gagging. The pain that racked my body was nothing like I had expected. But good thing for me, I had taken self-defense classes when I was young and stupid. Obviously the smartest thing I had ever done. Feet shoulder width apart. That was one of the most important things to remember. If I wasn't a lot stronger than most thought I was, I would have been on my knees. But I had the benefit of not being totally surprised. I sucked in a deep breath and lashed out with a punch of my own that landed exactly where I wanted it to. My fist caught the underside of her chin, causing her to stumble back a few steps. But she regained her composure quickly. Not fast enough, though. I was on her in seconds, arm across her throat and pushing her into the wall. I felt like Hyde stir, and I knew I wasn't the only one who felt that threat. And she was wide awake. Believe me, I had no idea why Simon was in such a hurry to give me a beating. But I bet I would find out soon enough. I'd been fighting in heels long enough to know I could do it and get in the information I wanted. Only she couldn't keep up. Before I could ask any questions, she had a foot behind my ankle, and then I was in a controlled roll to the floor, landing hard against the occupied easels in the room. The painting crashed to the floor, knocking over something breakable. It shattered on the floor, sending small pieces of broken silvered glass all over us. We had somehow knocked over the mirror that had been on the opposite wall. Strangely enough, I hadn't noticed it until that moment. There was now the shift that I felt deep inside my mind, this time as well as in my bones and my muscles. It was a noticeable shift, one that I'd never felt before, and it left me shaken enough that Sarah was able to get in another blow. This one connected with my left cheekbone, sending searing pain throughout my head and stars into my vision. While I tried to gather my senses, Sarah's lips were next to my ear and her hand gripping my throat. "Who are you?" This was a question I had already answered, and truthfully, whether she wanted to believe it or not. Blythe McAllister of Agora Gallery, art consultant and expert. That was all the truth, I gasped as her squeezing hand. She used her other hand to grab my hair, taking a nice fistful of red locks, and slammed my head into the heavily carpeted floor, which still hurt regardless. Before I could get a word out, she was speaking again. "And why are you here?" The words came out of her like a hiss. Her eyes were just as menacing. She meant business. And so did I. But I would not be bullied. Exactly the reason my co-worker told you on the phone. But I do have an ulterior motive, and it will be explained as long as you let me. She gave me a long once over that felt like it took an eternity. Her eyes widened, and I knew she had seen the flash of emerald green that told people what I was if they ever got close enough to tell the difference. Before now, the only people that were long dead and buried, only Hyde knew where. It was alright with never knowing. She jumped off me like she'd been bitten by a snake, almost toppling over the cat that had barely moved since Sarah decided to attack me unprovoked. I stood cautiously and smoothed down my now wrinkled dress that had ridden up my legs in the struggle, nearly exposing the lacy garment underneath. One of my shoes slipped off and was lying red sole facing up like it was staring at me, abandoned. I picked it up and slid my foot back into it with stupendous balance and placed my foot back onto the floor, cocking my hip and staring into the face of the artist who just happened to be a worthy adversary. Who would have thought? All right, she paused, taking a deep breath, letting out with a soft whistle. Why else are you here? Her body mirrored my own, hip cocked, hands at her sides, and eyes on me, impatiently awaiting my response. I pushed my hair out of my face and tried to catch my breath as I felt Hyde moving again. I took control and pushed her back down into wherever it was that she went, while she wasn't actively trying to ruin my life. I had two reasons for my visit today, one of which I was going to divulge before I was attacked for a reason I can only guess at, which is why I think you should tell me your reason for attacking me first. But I am willing to let that go. Her eyes met mine with disdain. I have a problem, and it seems like you know more about it than I do. I gestured toward her remaining paintings scattered throughout the room, expertly displayed on their easels. Those brown orbs moved from me to the paintings, going back and forth between the two as if she had a decision to make. In truth, she did. She could trust me and help me. Or she could throw me out of her condo after kicking my ass, which she seemed more likely to do this particular juncture. Her shoulders sagged as if all the air had left her body. It seems that I do. But what do you want to do about it? I shrugged. I don't even know what this is. Once I know what all of this means, I'll have a better answer for you. Right now, all I want is to see what you know now, what you know, and how you know it. Then we can move on from there. How do I know if I can trust you or that thing moving around inside of you? I've seen what she does, and I'm not thrilled about teaming up with that. She pointed at me, but more like threw me to Hyde, curled up in some deep, dark hole. All I can say is don't give me a reason to let her out, and you'll be okay. She guffawed, bending over as she laughed and practically slapped her knee as she did so. You control that monster. Yeah, like I haven't seen everything, Blythe. She stood straight and took a step toward me, a finger pointed directly at the center of my chest. She has more control over you than you do of her. That is the harsh truth, and that needs to change before more end up dead. Not saying some, like the last one, didn't deserve it though. Sarah moved gracefully from to a stool sitting by a painting by the far wall and sat down. The shocked look on my face made her laugh again, doubling over, gasping for the second time in the last 5 minutes. I don't know why this is so funny to you. I don't even know how you know any of this. I can guess that you have visions of some sort, but I've never heard of anyone knowing as much as they do from flashes of events. Not like this, anyway. And you know about visions. How? Sarah crossed her arm and gave me a blank stare. What? Just because of how I look means I'm not smart. I do read. Unfortunately, the closest book I can find that even remotely fits my situation is Stevenson's book, which isn't exactly a help. I sighed and let myself collapse into a heap on the floor with my head in my hands. It was too early in the day to become a self pitying mess, but here I was. Yeah, it's way off. Okay? So, anyway, my dreams have always translated into real life events, but the most disturbing have always been the ones with you in them. I'd be lying if I said they were just started, but they've been going on for years. When did they start? I looked at her. When I was little, I could tell my mother about the girl with the red hair in my dreams, that she was a good girl, but something inside of her made her do bad things. She exhaled and let her head drop, causing her bangs to fall over her eyes. She didn't care to move them out of the way, she just let them stay there like they would hide her from everything she had seen me do through another's will. Yes, that was it. Hyde enforced me to do her will, and I didn't know a way to fight it, or if there even was one. And what Sarah said was true. Hyde had been present in my life since I was young, but still old enough to know what she made me do was wrong. Old enough to want to change it, but without the knowledge to do so. My parents didn't see it until I hit puberty and Hyde began to prefer the company of adolescent teenage boys instead of a cat or a dog. Because of her, I lost my virginity early enough for me to feel guilty about it, and that kid ended up dead. The only time I had been able to keep her out of it was when I wanted to experience it on my own. I experimented and found marijuana had been effective, but only that once. It never worked again, and alcohol never did. If anything, it guaranteed an appearance, and that I was what I was trying to avoid. The only reason I drank now was to take the edge off the anxiety of having her tagging along. What do I do? I asked. I asked honestly and openly. I had no clue what getting rid of her would take, and I was willing to try anything. Sarah sat up straight, picked up one of her brushes, and began to finger the bristles as she spoke. Find a way to get used to her, because no matter how much you want her gone, She'll always be right there, she said sternly as she pointed at my eyes with two fingers. Whether you want her to be or not.